Did you know that there are three ways in which you can apply curves in Lightroom, and on top of that, they actually override each other, so you have to use them in a precise order if you don't want to be limiting your dynamic range? Hi, I'm Vlad and I'm a Lightroom nerd. A few years ago, I came up with the idea of using color response curves to emulate the colors of film in Lightroom by sampling them from film emulation LUTs in DaVinci Resolve and then translating those LUTs into simple red, green and blue curves that we can apply to our photos in Lightroom. This way, we get the colors of film and we still have access to all of our sliders in order to edit our photos. But I have to come clean about a thing. At that moment, I didn't really understand that there are three different ways in which you can apply a curve in Lightroom and that the order actually matters. First of all, we have the curves in the curves panel. They live under the basic adjustments tab, and as you can see, I already have some color response curve applied to my photo using the red, green and blue channel. And we can also bake this set of curves as a camera profile, and for that I'm gonna save them as a preset and then go to Photoshop, where I'm going to apply that preset and bake it as a camera profile. But this method has a few quirks which I'm going to explain later on. Now let's also talk about the third type of curves, which is the curves that we can apply by creating a mask on top of our photo. I prefer using a linear gradient, clicking right outside the photo so the mask is covering the entire photo, and in here we can actually apply another set of custom curves that can define the look of our photos. And don't get me wrong, the fact that we can stack together so many curves is absolutely amazing. It means that I can put together a look where I have a film emulation, a film print emulation, and a good translation from the camera to a neutral color space. But at the same time, because Lightroom is not open about all this, it meant that I had to figure this out by myself while playing around with borders. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's one of my previous videos. I'm gonna link it up there, but it's explaining a way to add borders directly in Lightroom without having to go to Photoshop for this simple task. But let's go back to curves. In Lightroom, I'm going to add a super aggressive fade to this test photo, and now with this in place, you can see that I can no longer crush my blacks or blow out my highlights. And that's because of the curve that I implemented over here. This is limiting me from playing with the exposure beyond those 2 points. So in conclusion, we can extrapolate that the tone curve is applied after the basic adjustments tab in the processing chain. And this means that whatever values we input in the basic adjustments tab are going to be overridden by the tone curve. But in the basic adjustments tab, we also have the camera profile. And because I wanted to know if the tone curve is also applied on top of that, I created this fade test camera profile. This is applying the same curve that I used before, but as a camera profile on my photo. And now let's play with the curves. I'm dragging the black point down, but as you can see, the camera profile is overriding this. So the camera profile, the faded camera profile, is limiting how low I can go with my black point, and it's preventing me from going lower than the 50 point that I had before on this raised black curve. So the camera profile from the basic adjustments tab is actually applied after the tone curve from the curves panel. But what about the tone curve that are applied inside of a mask? So I'm going to apply the faded camera profile once again, and I'm going to create a mask, linear gradient, and make sure that it covers the entire photo. And in this mask, I'm going to drag on the black point down, and let's see if I can crush the blacks. And as you can see, that was quite immediate, and I'm pretty sure I can do the same with the highlights, and I've clipped my highlights using the curves in the mask. And keep in mind, this is happening with the faded camera profile that was previously preventing my tone curve from clipping the blacks. So that means that the curves inside of a mask are applied on top of the curves that are inside of a camera profile, and those are applied on top of the curves from the curves panel. And there's one more thing, the order in which you apply Lightroom masks actually matters, and I can demonstrate that applying a thick white border in Lightroom, and then with a linear gradient, I'm going to cover the entire image, And in this mask, I'm going to tone down the white point. And you can see that the pure white border applied in the previous mask got toned down as well. So all the masks inside of Lightroom are applied from the bottom up, like the layers in Photoshop. So, in conclusion, when we're editing our photos in Lightroom, basic adjustments are gonna come first. Next up, we have the tone curve from the curves panel, the curves that are baked in our camera profiles, and lastly, we have curves that are used inside masking in order from bottom to top. And now with all that knowledge in place, let me show you how I use it in order to emulate the colors of film in my digital workflow. I'm going to start by switching to a camera neutral camera profile in Lightroom because I shot this on a Sony a7 III, and Sony cameras are notorious for having really yellowy camera standard profiles, and you can even see this here, although this photo is pretty blue. But camera neutral is going to allow me to have a better color translation layer in here. So for now, I'm going to use camera neutral, and first thing first, I'm gonna fix my white balance because it's way too blue and I also have pretty magenta shadows. So starting with the white balance, I'm going to push it to the right until I see the highlights in the photo getting warmer, but I'm gonna pay attention to the clouds because I don't want the darker parts of the clouds to get into the warm territory. I want them to be neutral or slightly blue. And now I'm also going to push some green into the photo, but as you can see, there is mostly magenta in the shadows, so instead I'm gonna go to the calibration panel over here and push some green into my shadows until I start to see the magenta disappear. Now I can tone back vibrance and saturation to normal values and we're left with a pretty neutral photo. Now I'm going to skip fixing my exposure and I'm gonna go directly to my color response curve folder, and I'm looking for a color response curve that's gonna look natural in daylight. And that today is gonna be Kodak 200, Kodak Gold 200, which is known to have pretty warm looking colors, and I wanna see if I can make that work for a wintry day like this one. And on top of it, I want to also apply a film print, and that's gonna be the classic Kodak 2383 D60. So for this specific photo, I'm using the camera neutral camera profile to neutralize the colors that Adobe is messing up from my Sony camera. I'm using the tone curve to get the film colors from Kodak 200 Gold on my photo. And on top of all this, I'm using a mask with Kodak 2383 film print emulation to get all the colors to look like this photo belongs in a movie. And you can already see that my photo starts to look a bit like a movie, but with some exposure adjustments, we can take that to the next level. But before I do that, I'm also going to crop down the image because all this contrasty area down here where the snow meets the dark fence is very distracting, having tons of contrast. So I'm gonna go for a wide aspect ratio and I'm going to select 16:9 and reframe the image in such a way that I'm still in the middle of the frame, but there's not that much of the contrasty area down there. Now, going back to curves, I want to take a look on how my color response curves look, and we can see that we have a nice highlight shoulder over here where we can push our whites pretty far and they are not going to clip whatsoever, but we are losing data. So let's pull the highlights back down just a tiny bit, but not too far because we don't want those clouds to have too much contrast in them. And now I'm also going to raise the exposure in my shadows a bit to recover some of the details. And I'm really starting to think that I missed my mark in terms of white balance because, as you can see, my face is looking pretty unnatural. So let's tone it down a bit. I'm going for 6500 Kelvin. This is more appropriate for a winter photo. And I think there's one more problem with the photo, and that's the amount of details that I have in my shadows and in my highlights, because on film you wouldn't get those many details in the shadows. But first, let me apply some grain to have a better understanding of the photo and the amount of details that it should have, because my all-in-one grain presets are also reducing the amount of details in the shadowy areas to replicate the film more naturally. And now I'm gonna use the tone curve to actually tone down my shadows. So I'm gonna drop a point on the back of the backpack over here, which we can see that is pretty dark. And I'm going to tone this down, and another point somewhere on my face in the highlights to tone this up significantly. Overall, I think I have too much contrast, so I'm going to tone this down just a tiny bit and maybe tone down the amount of shadow details that I pumped previously and increase the final exposure of the photo. And just like that, you can see that I got a film-like, more like a movie-like look in just a few clicks in Lightroom in less than 10 minutes or so. And of course, the look of the image can further be improved with localized masking to tweak exposure or colors and things like that. But today I wanted to focus on what we can achieve using color response curves and curves in general. And I know curves in general can be a bit confusing, and I really didn't get into the basics today. If you want to learn more about that, there are tons of resources on the web, and you should probably come back to this video later on. But anyway, that was it for today. I really hope that you learned something new, and if you did, make sure to hit the subscribe button for more advanced Lightroom tutorials and generally photography related content, because that's what I'm posting on this channel. This is how the final image turned out in my case, and that was it for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.